So this is the GCSE RS revision on Muslim beliefs and teachings. So this goes alongside the other revision PowerPoints and booklets that work alongside as well. So just a brief introduction to Islam, some of the key points to have a look at. So the word Islam has got different meanings, including surrender and peace. And when we come on to the peace and conflict topic, that's something we'll review over. Muslims believe that they should surrender to the will of Allah. One of the most important beliefs in Islam is Tawhid, which means there is one God. The most important duty of a Muslim is the Shahada, and this is declaring faith in the one God. This is something that we will look at in a lot more detail within the next topic when we focus on the 5 pillars within the practices topic. Muslims believe that God is a single entity. He's not made of different persons and does not have a son, obviously in contrast with the Christianity topic. And the only sin that God will not forgive is attributing godlike qualities to anything else. So just considering the booklet and we will look at the qualities of God in a moment. But a question over why are there no images of God in mosques, or why is it wrong to create an image of God? The reason behind that is that God is unique. There is nothing like God, and no one can picture, describe, or compare him. So rather than attempting to do that, no images are made. Instead, mosques are decorated with verses of the Quran. So the idea then of the supremacy of God's will is that God's the creator and controller of everything. Nothing will happen without God allowing it to. And that's both good and bad. Obviously, it's a difficult idea to think of at times. Muslims believe that God has reasons for allowing things to happen, and so they will trust the will of God and will accept things. Muslims may say the phrase God willing or inshallah after making plans, because they know it is God who is in control. So this idea of before making plans, if God allows it. Some Muslims think that God controls humans, but others would say that, well, as humans we have free will, we make our own choices. So there are some slight differences on this idea. For few it may be that God is completely in control, whereas for others it will be that we do have free will. So continuing to think about the supremacy of God's will and what the impact may be for belief for Muslims. And this is good practice on the 4 and 5 mark questions, thinking particularly of the 4 mark question, the impact of these beliefs. So by believing in God, it's not enough. You must also show belief in the way that you live your life. So if you really do truly believe in God and the supremacy of God's will, you'll live your life in that way. It will also teach you that you should only worship God. Don't put anything above God. You should also accept that bad things can happen and that they are part of Allah's plan, or that they are meant to be. Again, it's a very difficult idea to put into practice. What you'd also do is try to live your life according to God's will in everyday life, so following what you believe is God's will. So within the information booklet, there is some information on Sunni and Shia Islam, so 2 branches, the 2 main branches of Islam. So a little bit of information then that's in the booklet. So when Muhammad died, Islam was divided into 2 groups, Sunni and Shia. Sunni Islam, they believe that Muhammad elected Abu Bakr to be their leader or caliph. Caliphs did not make laws, but did make sure that people in the community were following the laws that were there. And they believe that the authority comes from the Quran and the Sunnah, which are the teachings and actions of Muhammad. Now, approximately 90% of Muslims are Sunni. If we look at Shia Islam, They believe that Muhammad elected his cousin Ali as his successor. They believe that the true leader or imam must be a descendant of Muhammad. Shia Muslims have their own interpretations of Muslim laws and only accept sayings of Muhammad that are passed down from Ali and the followers. And within Shia Islam, there's something called the imamate, and that's where you would accept the 12 imams as the leaders of Islam, and that they guard the truth of the religion without error. We'll have a little look in detail in a moment at some of the similarities and differences. And just a point, in the booklet there's space to summarise the 6 articles of Sunni Islam and the 5 roots of Shia Islam. Now on the screen there are some examples of 3 things that overlap both. And you'll see it in the textbook as well. So the 6 articles of faith in Sunni Islam, and remember, a good way of associating this is if you think Sunni or Sun articles, so articles in the Sun newspaper. It's not a great way of remembering, but it may help. So Sunni, you've got articles, and Shia Islam, you've got roots. So the 6 articles in Sunni Islam, you've got Tawhid, which is belief in one God. Angels, belief that angels passed on God's messages to the prophets. You've also got belief in holy books, such as the Quran. Belief in the prophets, and that's to show respect for them, particularly Muhammad, who received the final revelation of the Quran. The Day of Judgment, which is the belief that at the end of the world, everyone will be judged by God and sent to paradise or hell. And the last is the supremacy of God's will, belief that nothing happens unless God wants it to. And the 5 roots of Shia Islam are Tawhid, so again, belief in one God. Prophethood, again, respect for the prophets, in particular Muhammad. The justice of God, or Adalat, which is belief that God will judge everyone on the Day of Judgment in a fair and just way and hold them to account for their actions. You've also got the imamate, which is respect for those 12 imams who were chosen by God. And also the resurrection. So belief that after death, Muslims will be resurrected and judged by God. So the 3 I've put on the screen are Tawhid, which is explained in the same way for both. Also belief in or respect for the prophets or prophethood. And the last one, the idea of judgment, it sort of links the idea of resurrection as one of the 5 roots, where you'll be judged by God once you're resurrected. And also one of the 6 articles is belief in the Day of Judgment. So those 3 are quite useful just to remember. So again, thinking about questions on this, you might be asked why the 6 articles are important. So they underpin and influence all aspects of life. So they will influence how you live. Also, the angels write up all of the actions and thoughts of people, and we will have to justify them. So it makes you think about how you will live your life, knowing that at some point you will have to justify what you've done or thought. Also, to know what is right, Muslims must follow the teachings of the Quran and prophets. So you've got a few quite good points there that may be useful for a question on the 6 articles. Again, looking at the 5 roots and how they may influence. There might be some very similar responses, but prophethood means that you're not alone in life, and the Quran gives guidance. Belief in justice is difficult, but it means that you can allow or accept that Allah knows best. It helps you to accept that. And the imamate means that we have leaders that we can trust. So going back to Sunni and Shia Islam, there's a really good link to a TrueTube clip that you may remember. It's a great conversation between a Sunni and Shia Muslim, and it shows some of the similarities and differences that they have through their conversations and arguments. But it's a really positive video to watch, so have a look at that. So some similarities of Sunni and Shia Islam. Firstly, our belief in God, belief in the prophets and Muhammad, also the guidance and importance of the Quran and following the Sunnah. So there's lots of similarities that you can focus on. The differences, though, will focus on aspects of belief and law. Also, there are tensions, and there can be tensions between these different groups in some countries, such as Syria, where Sunni fighters are fighting the Shia government. So you've got both sides there. There are some similarities, but also some differences. So we're now going to focus on the qualities and beliefs about Allah. So there are 99 names of Allah in the Quran and Hadith, and these can help Muslims to understand something of God's nature. So each name is a quality of God. And it's really easy to find the list of the 99 names, but I've just put 3 examples down, quite simple ones to remember. It could well be a 2-mark question to give 2 names of Allah. So some examples are the Great One, the Wise One, and the Loving One. So some of the beliefs about Allah or God are listed here. You've got space in your booklet to write them in more detail. So one belief is that God is immanent. God is within all things and close to people. God is also transcendent. So as well as being immanent, the idea that God is beyond all things or outside of this world. God is also omnipotent, almighty, having unlimited power. God is beneficent. God is the source of all goodness. God is merciful. He understands suffering. He cares and forgives. And the last 2 are that God acts with fairness and justice. He treats people equally and justly. So there's space in your booklet to write all of these things in more detail. So a bit more detail on God as immanent. So within all things and close to people. A quote to support this is, "And he is with you wherever you may be." Allah knows humans so well. He knows what people will say before they say it. And Muslims believe that Allah must be in this world to help and guide. So immanence means that Allah is active within the world. So a very different idea, God being transcendent, means beyond all things. Nothing there is like him. There's another quote to support. So he's outside of time, whereas we are subject to time. Allah has no beginning or end, so cannot be a part of time. Allah is beyond human understanding. He's limitless, and so he's not part of this world. So being omnipotent, God is almighty and has unlimited power. He is able to do all things, is a quote to support with that. And this quote ensures a Muslim submits to him. Humans will always need him, and there's a reason for everything that happens. He sees every action and knows the innermost thoughts, and he's always there. God is beneficent. So God is the source of all goodness. He's referred to as the Beneficent 57 times in the Quran. He's compassionate, and humans have free will to follow his path. And this means that humans should focus on good, like charity and loving kindness. So a further quality is that God is merciful. God understands suffering, cares and forgives. In the Quran, God is called merciful 160 times. And the mercy of Allah is reflected in his rules within the Quran. Allah's mercy helps humans and means that they're never alone. And so looking at fairness and justice together. So God acts with fairness and justice, treating people equally and justly. Justice, or adalat, means fairness. Allah is absolute, and so always does what is right. Muslims must try to do this. So humans are commanded to be just and fair. And the 5 pillars that we'll look at in a lot more detail within the next topic supports the idea of everybody being just. A Muslim should never be extreme, too angry or too calm, for example. Justice and fairness is somewhere in between. Shia Muslims believe that the justice of Allah is absolute. And there are at least 40 verses of the Quran that discuss justice. So this is possibly quite a common exam question. How do beliefs about Allah affect Muslims today? So you're not explaining what the beliefs are, you're talking about how these beliefs would impact how you live your life today. So belief that talents are given by Allah in His beneficence. So we must make the most of our talents. Knowledge that Allah is always there for support. The idea that failure is a lesson to learn from. And it could encourage people to make the world a better or fairer place. There's loads of arguments you could use, focusing on maybe one or two of these qualities of Allah, but these are just a few examples. So we'll now think about angels in Islam. An angel is a spiritual being that's believed to act as a messenger of God. And just as a reminder, in Sunni Islam, belief in angels is one of the 6 articles of faith. They're seen to have been created by light, and they are supernatural beings and part of the unseen world. It's believed that angels can receive God's words directly and pass them on to the prophets. Angels are seen as being pure and sinless, and they don't have free will. Angels have lots of different roles. So some angels are seen to be involved in the lives of humans, soon after conception until the moment of death. Some may be guardian angels, and they might take care of people. Others will record the deeds that people think or say or do in a book of deeds, which is presented on the Day of Judgment. Other angels have different roles, like the angel Israfil, who will blow a trumpet to announce Judgment Day. So we'll look at 2 examples of angels in a moment. So the angel Jibril, or within Christianity is thought as Gabriel, that's the angel that's most familiar to Christians and Jews as well as Muslims. He's an archangel, a special angel with a high status, and is a trusted messenger of God. And the important thing with Jibril, he often returned to Muhammad and spoke God's message, and so he relayed the Quran to Muhammad. He's known as the Spirit of Holiness, and he was the first thing to be given life by Allah. He opened up the Zamzam well, and he also told Maryam, or the Virgin Mary, that she would have a son, Jesus. So 2 angels that we're going to focus on, Jibril is a really important one to think about and to think of the role that he played. The next angel that's quite an important one that we focus on in Islam is Michael, or Michael, who's also a high-ranking archangel. He's seen as the angel of mercy. God assigned Michael to reward righteous people for good that they do during their lives on earth. He also sends thunder, rain and lightning. He's in charge of plants and rain, which could be symbolic for being in charge of spiritual and material things. This idea of bringing nourishment to the earth and to human life. The idea of predestination is that God knows or determines everything that will happen. On the one hand, when we think of Sunni Islam, we think about the idea that God does determine everything that will happen. A quote that supports this is, "Only what God has decreed will happen to us." So this is the idea that God has planned what will happen in the world. So God knows the future and has also planned it. He's so powerful, he can make anything happen. And humans don't have the freedom to change their destiny. God has planned it. Although they may have some sort of choice in what they do, they can't change their destiny. In Shia Islam, however, there's a general belief that God knows everything that will happen, but hasn't planned it. It doesn't mean he's decided it, it just means that he knows what the future will be. Because he's outside of our space and time, he knows what choices we will make. So the idea of predestination, knowing if someone's going to heaven or hell, God would know that, but he hasn't planned it. And there's a question here on how that could influence somebody. So if God knows what we will do, on the one hand, if you look at Sunni Islam, it might make you more trusting in God, knowing that God has planned it. It could help you for both. It could help you to accept that negative things happen. It's all part of God's plan. In Shia Islam, there's probably more focus though on free will. I can change my destiny. So it might make you more proactive, for example, in what you do. But what it does for everybody, it confirms Allah's omnipotence and omniscience. So God knows what will happen. God has the power to change things. So moving on to beliefs on life after death. In your booklet, there is a table to fill in with the different ideas and different stages. So in Islam, death is not the end. It's the beginning of a new stage called AQA. And there are a few main stages that happen. So the first is barzakh, meaning barrier. After death, somebody is in a state of consciousness in the grave. They enter this state of waiting. No one can cross that barrier to change all wrongdoings or to warn others about it. As part of that, two angels will question them. If they answer correctly, they will see rewards. If not, they'll see punishments. And there are different views on whether that begins straight away or whether there's a wait until Judgment Day. So the next stage, so that's the first stage, is barzakh. The next stage is Judgment Day. On the day that only God knows, Israfil will blow the trumpet to declare that it's Judgment Day. Everybody who's ever lived will be raised from the dead and judged by God. And they now have new bodies. People will then be given the book of deeds, and it shows everything that's happened to them in life. If they're given the book in their right hand, they'll go to heaven. If they're given it in the left, they will go to hell. And so what then happens, so in this last stage of heaven and hell, God sorts the souls. People will cross a narrow Sirat bridge that spans the fires of hell. You're transported across quickly if you are going to enter heaven. So a little bit about heaven or paradise, called Jannah. It's described as gardens of happiness. And it's the reward for faith and good deeds. It's a magical, mystical place. All desires are fulfilled. It's beyond human imagination, and there are several levels. Hell, or Jahannam, is described as a place of fire and torment, and it's for punishment for rejecting God and doing evil. People will wail in misery. Anyone trying to climb out will be pushed back in. And there are several levels and different punishment for different sins. Quite often we think about these sorts of questions where you might be asked, how this could influence a Muslim today, or why belief in this is important. So belief in the afterlife is one of the 6 articles and one of the 5 roots. So that's quite a good argument to use in a lot of these points, that it's one of the 6 articles and 5 roots. It encourages human responsibility and accountability for what we do. Everything we do is recorded in our Book of Deeds. It urges people to avoid sin and to do the right thing. And if someone's suffered in life, it gives them something to look forward to, or this idea of justice afterwards. Lots of arguments there. You would probably only need to write 2 in a little bit of detail. So we're moving on to the idea of prophethood. And this refers to when somebody is made a prophet or a messenger of God's word. And Risala is the belief in the prophets and their importance as messengers. So there's a couple of examples of prophets that we'll look at. And the first is Adam. He is seen as the first human, being the first prophet. So prophets are important for a few reasons. They provide a method of communication between God and humans. And a prophet is sent at a time where humans forget or misunderstand God's message. And that's when he sent prophets to put them on the right path. There have been around 124,000 prophets. 25 of them are named in the Quran. And they are important as they're role models. And you could get asked a question on a particular prophet that we explore. They were good people who followed God's will. Examples include Adam, Ibrahim or Abraham, Isa or Jesus, and Muhammad. So the first example is Adam. He was the first man on earth and the first prophet. God created him from dust and breathed life into him. He's seen as the father of the human race and is treated with reverence and respect. So reasons why he was important. So again, father of the human race, he taught humans everything we need to know. He was given knowledge from God. He taught that life on earth is temporary, eternal life is within the next life. And he built the Kaaba as the first place of worship. So what Muslims can learn from him, although he disobeyed Allah when he ate from the tree of knowledge when he should not have done, he repented and wanted to receive Allah's mercy and found salvation. So you could be asked a question on Adam, Ibrahim or Muhammad as examples of prophets. So Ibrahim is an important prophet. He fulfilled all of the tests and commands given to him by God. He's seen as the father of all nations. The key thing with him as a role model was his obedience to God. So when he was asked by God to sacrifice his son, the most important thing to him, he was willing to. And we'll explore that story, which is what Eid al-Adha focuses on and remembers during Hajj, in more detail in the next topic. But that example of his obedience is really important. He also refused to worship idols, and he destroyed idols. When that happened, the people tried to burn him alive, but miraculously only the chains were burned and he walked away. What Ibrahim did was to rebuild the Kaaba after it had been destroyed. And in memory of the willingness to sacrifice his son, an animal is slaughtered at the festival of Eid al-Adha. And we'll look at that in more detail in the next topic. Important thing to remember, Adam built the first Kaaba, Ibrahim rebuilt it. So the final prophet was the Prophet Muhammad. He was the final and the greatest of the prophets. He was religious from an early age, and the angel Jibril visited him, and for the next 20 years returned to give him God's message. And over the course of this time, these revelations were combined together and that is the Quran. On the night journey, when Jibril took him on a miraculous journey to Jerusalem, Muhammad spoke to prophets like Jesus, and he was told then that people should pray 5 times a day. Muhammad's teachings and practices are called the Sunnah and are found in the Hadith and Sirah texts, and they are still used as sources of Islamic law or Sharia law. Something important about Muhammad, as well as being the Quran being revealed to him and teachings of how to practice Islam. Muhammad was persecuted for his preaching, and he fled with his followers to Medina. And he helped to conquer Mecca, converting the city to Islam. So a few points really. Obviously, Muhammad being the most important and final prophet, there's a few questions you could have about him. And so this is quite an interesting one. What impact does the Prophet Muhammad have on Muslims today? So one, as an individual, he was the perfect example of a man serving Allah without question. He was focused, determined, modest, caring and humble. As a leader, he was the greatest religious and political leader of all time, allowing religious freedom, women's rights, and he cared for the elderly. He was seen as a good father and led a strong family unit. And as a teacher, he lived every aspect of Islamic life so others could learn and follow from him. So if you were asked questions around the impact belief in him has, there's some really good examples here. So looking at the imamate, so when Muhammad died, it wasn't clear who should succeed him. And as we saw before, Muslims split into 2 groups, Sunni and Shia. Sunnis elected Abu Bakr as their first caliph, but Shias believed that Muhammad's cousin should be his successor, his cousin Ali. So Ali became the first imam, and they believed that leadership should follow the family line, and each imam that followed was the son of the previous one. So the 12th branch of Shia Islam believe there have been 12 imams in total. The last one is Muhammad al-Mahdi, and they believe that he's been kept alive by God and hidden somewhere on earth, and that he will return with Jesus to bring justice and equality. And they believe that imams rule justly and interpret the Quran without fault.